Uh, Delighted to have a number of you here, and we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be more coming along as we go anyway. But look, I suppose this is all about looking to hear from Frank Dillon. So thanks very much, Frank, for coming along and really talking, giving us an update on what Irish Men's Shed is all about. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to yourself.
Great, thanks very much, Jimmy. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for your time. What I'm going to do today is talk you through the development of men's sheds in Ireland, the why of men's sheds, what we do at the Irish Men's Sheds Association, health and wellness in the sheds, and then I have a piece on malehealth.ie because March is for men, and it's a very simple, useful resource that you might use yourself, you might share with significant males in your life, and more of that and on. But first of all, I'm going to tell you a story about the genesis of the sheds. So if you cast yourself to Goolwa in southern Australia, it's about 200 kilometres south of Adelaide. And there's a fantastic lady called Maxine Chaseling, and she runs the active retirement program for Goolwa Community Centre. And she told the story of men in cars. At 2 o'clock every afternoon, the active retirement program would start, and the cars would pull up at 2 o'clock, and all the ladies would get out and all the men would sit in the car, and they'd either read the paper or they'd go off and get a paper and come back and sit in the car on their own. And what Maxine noticed was, over time, she said, the cars would stop coming because the men would pass away and she'd have to send a minibus around to collect the ladies. So she thought about this problem, and she thought about not just her problem, but she thought about what was happening to men. And she'd realized that it was the problem of isolation, that the males just were not engaging. They wouldn't engage with the active retirement home. That wasn't for them. They had worked their days and they just wanted to sit alone and read the paper, which turns out wasn't very good for them. So anyway, in her infinite wisdom, they had an old shed out the back, and there was a guy, a handyman called Raz, and they cleared it out. And what she used to do then was she used to go around when the ladies got in and settled into the active retirement home, into the active retirement program. Maxine would go out and she'd knock on the windows and she'd tell the men to say, look, you don't have to come in the front door. But if you go around the back, there's a shed there and there's a kettle and you might help yourself to a cup of tea. And she just left it as informal and as simple as that. And over time, what happened was the men eventually drifted around and joined into the shed. But then they got chatting to each other, and then they started making things, and then they started having a yarn, and then they started reaching out and helping other people. And that basically, in essence, was the formula born for what a men's shed is. Basically, the formula is to reduce isolation, improve the health of the man, but this instantly helps his family and then the wider community. And I think that's the important piece about sheds. They're called men's sheds, but the benefits are to the family, to the partners, and to the community in which they exist. And I'll tell you more about that. So for Game of Thrones fans, basically the lesson is the lone wolf dies and the pack survives. So I'll go on now and talk about, if my clicker works. There we go. So what is a shed? What is a men's shed? It's basically the embryonic start of a shed is 6 to 8 men who are regularly meeting together, and then they decide that they'd like to actually maybe get themselves their own property, their own site where they can just meet up. And what do? They very much, it's all about self-agreed programs, what they do. They do have a reputation for being workshops, but only 50% of them are workshops. Another 50% have gardens. They basically do what the men agreed to do. The theory being that the more activities that they go on, the more social inclusion goes on, the more the whole benefit of the shed increases. But at the same time, at the very core of it, what we say is the kettle is the most important tool in any shed. But why did they take off in Ireland? I suppose to understand that and take off so rapidly, to understand that, we have to talk about the figures. So in 2009, there was a massive recession. Male unemployment was the biggest outcome of that recession. More than female, I'm not saying females weren't employed, but more than female. It was a very structural industrial recession that led to a decline in the building industry and a lot of manual labor that saw a lot of men unemployed. At the same time, there was a backdrop in Irish society that 4 out of 5 suicides are male. And male life expectancy, even in 2021, with all the medical advancements, is still shorter than female life expectancy. And there's no real reason for that, because we're not going down coal mines anymore. We're not digging the Suez Canal. We're not putting ourselves in very dangerous, well, most of us aren't putting ourselves in very dangerous occupations. But life expectancy does fall off. Males also, as a huge percentage, I think it's 50 to 60%, do not engage in primary healthcare as their first option for a solution to any medical problem. And also, it's been discovered that isolation can cause physical damage equivalent to a cigarette habit of 15 a day. So you can imagine the mental damage that's done by isolation, but actually the physical damage of isolation has been measured to a 15 a day habit. So on this basis, against that backdrop, sheds in Ireland just grew and grew, and because the need was there, our biggest competitor is the high stool and the armchair, and that's where these men decided they weren't going to get involved in. And alcohol and gambling, just by the way, are forbidden in any sheds. They're written into the Constitution, and also they're open for any male over 18. And although our average age has sort of drifted up to about 65, as we came into the pandemic, we were at full employment. You would expect that. The most significant factor in any man's life at that stage was retirement. But now, coming out of this virus crisis, we're going to have, we do feel there's going to be a lot of pent up demand for sheds, because men who might have been unemployed at 60 go after, due to the crisis, are probably not going to find their way back to full employment. But it's nice to have a place to belong. It's nice to have a shed to go to for those extra few days. The word shed implies the informality of sheds. It's very much an informal, flat curved structure. There's no presidents. There's a committee. There's 2 signatures on checks. But it's a very, very flat structure built around the men, built around consensus and respect, and the men deciding what it is they want to do. So I'll talk about the Irish Men's Sheds. We were set up in 2011 to sort of lobby and to help the growth and the sustainability of the sheds as they were growing. We're an all-island body. We cover sheds in the north, all across the island. Shed members include, they can be industry specific, built around some large male-dominated workforce industries. We have sheds in correctional institutions. There's a new community shed down in Tremor. That's a fantastic story to be told about the new community. There's 6 different nationalities on their committee, and they run a thriving shed down there. There's traveller sheds still going, opened up very early on, and we're still getting applications for new ones. There's even a homeless shed in a shelter in Dublin, which is a great story in itself. So the growth of sheds, as I say, was very much exponential. Currently, we register about 457 sheds. We're still not sure what the pandemic is going to do to us, because a lot of sheds are struggling financially as they're closed and they can't raise funds. Yet they're still incurring direct costs, as I'm sure you as business people all can relate to. But that's what they are. They're mini social enterprises within their communities, and they're suffering from the same effects. So it's very much an urban-rural split. There's sheds in the villages of cities. If anyone's familiar with Dublin, there's a shed in Raheny, there's a shed in East Wall, there's a shed in Blackrock, and they just sort of congregate around. They develop in the villages as they do outside of the cities. And there's some great thriving sheds from anywhere from Carrigaline to, I'm thinking of Slane, which is a great story of a shed. They built their own shed eventually. There is sort of a league of sheds. There's the Premier League, as I like to call them. They've been up and running for about 10 years. They've developed. They have gotten their own site. They've developed their own shed, and they're very much a self-standing and very much an integral part of the community. Then there are other sheds. For example, in Leitrim, there's a great shed that they were set up in an old vocational school, because the Department of Education, in their infinite wisdom, just built a new school, told the old school, there's the new school, just move to the new school. And they left the old school there. So it turned out the principal who helped move to the new school, he then retired. And then he set up a shed, and he asked for permission from the Department of Education and the council to take over the lease of the old school full time, because they didn't seem to have a plan for it. It just sits there, and obviously it is full of equipment. It's got metal and woodwork equipment, but they haven't reached a formal agreement. But they're allowed to use it. So there's a lot that can be done in society if you if you compare that to what happens in Rostrevor, where the council and the main street renovated a building and they handed over the management to the local men's shed. So that basically means if a light bulb goes, if a window breaks, the men's shed are on hand to fix it, but they still have a state of the art. Well, it's a beautifully renovated community centre, and you can still, every other group in the community can meet in it, but guaranteed that the heating is kept on, the floors are swept, everything is looked after by the men's shed. They're sort of an anchor tenant, and not for a large amount of money either. And those type of initiatives are where we need Ireland to develop into as we come out of this and look towards a brighter and more inclusive future. So coming into the pandemic, we were opening at about 2 sheds per week. So the demand is still there, but we don't envisage thousands of sheds. We think there's a sweet spot in around 600 to 700 sheds based around strong communities, and I think they're self-evident. Whenever we're allowed to drive through Ireland again, the strong communities. When you're in a community, yes, the banks are pulling out, yes, the pubs are closing down, yes, some of the post offices are moving, but I think as we're all witnessing the increase in community on the high street, and hopefully that's a positive transition that will lead to a better future for everybody in Ireland. So we measured the impact of the sheds. It's such a simple idea, basically giving a man somewhere to go, somewhere to hang out, a purpose, something to do. But the impact of it has been huge. And we measured these impacts. I think they were taken about 2013. But the impacts have been phenomenal, of what it means to be part of a shed, what it means to be part of something at a time in your life. It's not necessarily retirement. It can be severe handicap. It can be unemployment. It could be any time. And in fact, we have stories now, funnily enough, of the remote workers who it's great to be working remotely, but you don't belong. You don't have a community. Some of you might identify as self-employed people, that you don't have somewhere to go. And we're seeing this engagement with sheds where people are semi-retired, but they're still working. That you don't need to be retired to be in a shed, and they're still checking in because it gives them somewhere to go. They can help out. They can help out with IT skills. They can help out developing the social media policy. They can do the accounts, but they're part of something, and again, the most important thing is the kettle. They're in there, they're chatting, and it's not, you don't have to go every day of the week. So there's that engagement is starting now, and that's going to be a story we're hopefully telling in a few years' time as we see it. But listen, enough of me talking. We're going to have a look now inside the shed, and hopefully the sound works. You might give me a thumbs up, Seamus, if that sounds, if you can hear it. Great.
It got me back on the road to the man shed, and I would have been lost without it now, to be honest with you, It got me back on the road to the man shed, and I would have been lost without it now, to be honest with you, you know.
Everybody who comes to the shed will tell you something different about what the shed does for you, but for me, it's made me smile again.
There we go. So that just gives you an insight into some of the sheds. Again, some from the north, some from the south, and the different activities. They're not all workshops. I think I said that earlier, but it's important to emphasize that, like, you don't need to bring anything to a shed. I think you'd be amazed at what you can actually give when you get there. But you don't need to come with the carpentry skill, with the woodwork skill, with the metalwork skill, or anything like that. They very much, you know, everybody finds an activity, and as I was in one shed in Dundalk, I didn't realise that actually sitting in the corner giving out to everyone else about what they're doing is an activity, but it is an immense shed as long as you're not doing it at home on your own. So it's a perfect world in that sense. This is a sample story of Jimmy. He featured in the video, and he's given us his permission to tell a story. But basically, he was 2 years off retirement. Himself and his wife were looking forward to their golden years. When she was caught by a bad viral illness and was rendered blind. And literally overnight, Jimmy became a full-time carer. From coming up to looking towards his retirement, he became full-time employed as a carer. And to be honest, he tells the story himself. He collapsed under the weight of it and the pressure of it. And it was his doctor who actually prescribed for him a men's shed, and he joined his local shed, and that gives him 2 days, sometimes 3 days respite every week, and it gives his wife great joy because he comes back from the shed having had a bit of a respite. She's in much better shape, and much better shape both mentally and physically. So that's just a sample story of what can happen for the men in the sheds. So there's two programs we work in the Irish Men's Sheds Association. One is a volunteer program, and they're the honeybees of our organization. There's kind of one roughly per county, and they go from shed to shed, sharing resources, sharing stories, sharing skills, and basically keeping the sheds connected. And then the other program we run is Sheds for Life. We have a weekly piece in the Farmers Journal each week. And we work closely with the Department of Rural Community Affairs, and also we run malehealth.ie, which I'll talk more about that later. But just talking about the sheds as a setting for health. I suppose it's important to state, in 1984, the World Health Organization defined health as a physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or illness. So it's in that light, in that holistic approach, is how, you know, Sheds for Life works within the sheds. The shed is a setting full of very hard to reach people as far as the medical profession is concerned, because these people don't engage with primary healthcare as readily as they should. They don't get things checked out. So it was a case of bringing the mountain to Muhammad and setting up a 10-week program across 4 counties, piloted, were part funded by the HSE, and it takes a holistic approach. There's base measurements taken at the start of 10 weeks, blood pressure, blood sugar, heartbeat, all those sorts of things, obviously weight and height, that dreaded measure, And then the men decide on a program of activities. There'll be programs like a healthy eating program, a fitness program, whether that's, you know, outside or inside, and various different key parts of the sort of, you know, the holistic approach to medicine. One of the programs is, like, for example, is computer literacy, because that is a key. That can be it can compound isolation if you don't know how to use a computer. Obviously that's changed during the pandemic, but it had to change. But we were actually trying to be a bit more proactive about it and getting people to connect with relatives and be able to connect with the outside world when they are living alone or living at home. So it's been a very successful program, but unfortunately we haven't had to roll it out as quickly as we could, because we did 8 counties back in 2019. We were about to do 8 more in 2020 when the pandemic struck, and so everything's sort of starting to back up, and that ever precious lifeline of funding that you get from the HSE is something that needs to be discussed. But we certainly know that the demand for sheds coming out of this is going to be as big. We just need to, and we're having those discussions now around the funding. In the meantime, people, you may ask what's been going on during the pandemic. Well, we've run every Friday at 12 o'clock. We have online CL Blue courses, which have been getting a huge amount of engagement, in the hundreds, which is fantastic, because it's the whole area of sort of Zoom and connecting that way has been like for everyone, it's been a fantastic learning curve. So that's been a huge piece. And then we actually have a mindfulness course every Tuesday, which I'm missing today, but that's okay. Actually, I might make it. It's at 11 o'clock, and that, again, we've had huge engagement to that. We've run what we call shedcasts, which are basically talks. We've had a chat with a range of people. Professor Luke O'Neill has kindly given us his time twice over the course last September and again this January. We've talked to people as diverse as Pat Jennings. I don't know if anyone remembers him, showing your age if you do. Northern Ireland goalkeeper, Arsenal, Tottenham Hotspur goalkeeper. Fantastic story, fantastic man. Just to chat about football, about life, really engaging conversation. And then we've had Dermot Gavin on to talk about gardening, and we went down a very practical road where we've had guys on talking about how to build a seed propagator. And all the time, each and every talk we do is getting 1 or 2 more men onto Zoom, getting them connected and keeping them connected and giving them something to talk about. And that's really all we can do. But we've been doing it quite well, and it's kept us all quite busy. So here's a little video on Sheds for Life that you might gives a bit more insight into it.
It's a Sheds for Life program. Like, we were doing our activities and we were doing things, but we were trying to broaden kind of what men were getting out of the shed as well. So this Sheds for Life program has dovetailed very well into what we were doing already. It's addressing the issues that we need to address, you know. It kind of focuses people on where they're at with their health and well-being.
We collaboratively work with the men to find out what their needs are, what their men's health in the men's shed setting. Finding a way to deliver a program on the men's own terms and where they feel most comfortable is really, really key to Sheds for Life. We're proving that men can do health. It's just the approach that you take is so important.
We have been threatening to do walking with maybe 2 years, but it never really took place. But like, if there's someone coming in on a special date, and once we started, then we'll keep it going.
3 weeks ago, I was in the hospital, I wasn't able to walk. And all this, I'm walking now. I was in a bed.
Sorry, that was me.
I'm telling you, only for the shed, I'd be a different person.
It's great, and it's great for the camaraderie that brings us closer again. It's doing things together. It's fantastic. And it does make us more aware as we're getting older of you know, we need to go and get our blood tested every year and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, very informative. Excellent, thoroughly enjoyable. The lady that was holding the meeting, she was brilliant.
All the men we've met have a wealth of information themselves. The collaboration has been great, the interaction has been really good. And it's a very adaptable and easy to understand program, that the awareness has been changed or increased with different elements of healthy food and healthy eating for the men and for myself too. And it's been great fun. It's really enjoyable.
Men, like, they don't speak face to face, they speak shoulder to shoulder, and fellas have become more aware of their health, and they're not as shy about coming forward and saying, look, I have prostate trouble, I have this, I have that. Do you know what? It's after putting a kind of a new slant on people about their health and health awareness.
So that's a piece on the Sheds for Life, and we obviously work with some very very good partners: Irish Heart Foundation, Diabetes Ireland, Marika Eating, Irish Cancer Society, Healthy Eating Made Easy, which is actually sometimes the cookery course can be hugely popular when you realise that, you know, that we're that generation where if a man loses his space, he loses the skill to cook, to eat, to feed himself, because he never picked up those skills. And so sometimes you're looking at men coming to cooking for the first time and they're 70 plus. But some great stories come out of it, and it really is it's a great program from that point of view. But just to to keep on the brief of March for Men, menshealth.ie, what's it called? Sorry, I lost my track. Malehealth.ie is set up in the parlance of a car service, because did you know in our lifetime we spend more money servicing our car than we do our actual bodies? So this is a very simple to use website. You go in, you put in your mileage, i.e. your age, and you say, having a bit of trouble with my head, with my heart, with my knee, with my joints, and it sends you off in the right direction to usually a partner organization where you can receive more information. And it's a very useful resource and a very just simple one of checking in. And if it keeps you off Google at 3 o'clock in the morning, diagnosing yourself with things that just don't exist, it's a good resource to have. But I just want to leave you with a bit of a clip of sort of the fun side of Sheds and what goes on. And this was taken from, there was a TV program done with Social Entrepreneurs Ireland earlier in the year about my big dream, and it featured men's sheds from around the country. So that's it. That's it for me. That's a brief overview that I can give you of the sheds. If anyone has any questions or any comments.
Right, Seamus here. Just want to say thanks very much. That was a pretty comprehensive overview, and it was a wake up for me. It's of so much that's going on there that's invisible, honestly, to me, and maybe others on the call as well. They can speak for themselves, but really, really fantastic. I suppose that one question comes to mind. I'm sure there's loads of other questions as well. Is the demographic, and is there a target or any strategy around attracting younger folks, or is it pretty much open to people who feel the need and they want to go there, or is there any particular targeting going on from your side?
Yeah, I suppose as everybody knows who runs a business, it's targeting is, yes, we need to do some, but we can't afford to. So I think awareness is our big piece. We need to increase the awareness and the availability. Obviously, I think all of society is going to be in some sort of reset, hopefully towards the middle to the second half of this year, as we come out of lockdown and decide that we're now not going back to the office 5 days a week, or we're going to move down to and work remotely and out of cities, whatever that settles into. There is a huge piece needed on the awareness side for the sheds to let people know that they exist and what they can offer. Demographics, we went into the crisis at about average age 65. When they set up in 2009, the average age was closer to 45, 49. And then as people either reskilled and went back into the workforce, it started to creep up, but they're not exclusively, they're open to anyone over 18, and that's just, and as I say, on a part-time basis, on a full-time, on a very much, you don't need to join and commit for 5 days a week. So I think we have a job to do, there's no doubt about it, and that's something that we will be hopefully getting about doing now. Brilliant.
Thanks, Frank. Can I ask you, Jonathan here?
Hi, John.
How great presentation and fantastic initiative. I didn't realize sheds were so wide, although I've seen, you see sheds, you're in places and you see a sign for a shed kind of tucked away in a corner. It's fantastic to see, but I'm just wondering, what's the demographic, do you know, comparison between here and in other countries? Are we seeing a difference with it being more skewed, and is that related to unemployment profiles, or do you have a sense of that?
We work closely with the Australian association. Although we have more men per sheds, more men in sheds per capita, they are at a more advanced stage of their organisation because they actually receive central government funding. But we're actually quite similar, and sort of if you say, right, similar types of society, certainly with the older generation that we're dealing with would be similar backgrounds in terms of employment. So it is, if anything, we probably have a lot more. So the average ages would be similar, but the story below that is that Irish sheds tend to have a lot more of the lower age going in and out of the shed. Not enough to bring down the average, but so for example, I think there isn't a shed in Ireland that doesn't have sort of somebody with mental disability of a younger age who can't work, who's structurally unemployed, engaging with the shed. I think we're better at that. I think that's probably what I'm trying to say is that on that structural unemployment where you're not in the retirement zone, but I suppose the doctors, the community groups that work with people have been more apt to subscribe a shed or to encourage somebody to join a shed. So in that sense, and then, as I said, there's the early startings of we're seeing remote workers engaging with sheds, but not enough to bring down the average as yet. I hope that answers it.
That does, yeah, great, thank you.
Is there, sorry, Frank, is there a challenge just not so much in the demographics, but across the background that people have? You mentioned that, there's great growth when there's a lot of manual kind of labor, a lot of people were made redundant and that kind of thing. Is there a perception that it's not for retired professionals?
Yeah, that is there are perceptual challenges. There's awareness, and then there's perceptual challenges because and believe me, men, when they're recommended a shed or told to go to a shed, they throw up every excuse, like, oh, I don't know anything about woodwork, or I don't know anything about gardening. So there's a lot of that. So we always have to sort of count, because it's usually what we do is we field a lot of calls from wives, kids, doctors saying, I have somebody here, do you know where they should go? Or do you know where their nearest shed is? And what we do is on the website, we've mapped out all the sheds. And we've asked for a primary contact, and this is a member of the shed who knows that their role is to field these calls, maybe meet somebody outside the shed and have a chat with them. So Sorry, I've drifted a bit, but yes, so we are seeing people engage with the sheds that are either in part-time work or, as I say, work remotely, and you have programs like Apple run a very good program. A lot of the American sort of bigger conglomerates where they have people working remotely they set up a system where to help them volunteer in a local social enterprise or a local charity, they will pay them for their day's work. So everyone gets a paid, say, day every quarter. And then and that's again what the association come in and do. So Apple will set it up on its payments program. We'll engage with them on that. But yet the man walks into, say, the Dungarvan shed, does his day, sends an email to Apple, and the whole thing ends up with the funds going into Dungarvan. So there are those, we're seeing that sort of cutting edge engagement, which is fantastic. And again, that's something that we're trying to get across to into as many corporates. And obviously it's a new message with the more people that are moving away from the office, and not only to be back there every quarter, every once a week, whatever the routine is, whatever the new world looks like for people.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to create that sense of community for office workers who are now at home, isn't it? Yeah.
I think, especially when you think of the main street and what's left the main street, and what we should be replacing the main street with, and I think and of course I'm biased, and everyone could correct me, but I think there should be a men's shed on the main street with window boxes, and they're the guys that put window boxes on all the main street, and then the Tidy Towns committee get together with them, and then the local sports club get engaged with them, and they make the nets, and then there's all sorts of and look, I think the future, the possibilities are there. These things are social enterprises, but they don't. Some of them are self-sustaining, some of them aren't. But the more they can engage with communities, the more they can become self-sustaining, not profit-making, but self-sustaining.
Yeah.
And Frank, you mentioned resistance, and like men would make up all sorts of reasons and so on for not going. Is there a kind of an enrollment process, for those men, to make it easy for men, I guess, who might be going through a certain level of challenge, and then they think, yeah, I'd like to get involved, but it's just awkward. And is there something that is in place, or you're thinking about already doing, that makes it easy for men to get over those self-limiting obstacles, I guess they might put in their place?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it is, they are very informal places. Like, the president doesn't have his parking space by the front door. There's none of that. And it's around this idea that it's the primary contact or a secondary contact that is listed they've put their hands up to say, they'll field the questions. And we field a lot of the questions too. It is very informal. You walk in, you have a cup of tea, and that's the height of it. As regards, coming down and seeing what it's like. And sometimes if it's a family, like you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But it has to be at some point. There has to be a commitment there, but to actually try it out, to walk in, to sample it, even to engage with the shed at, some of them are at farmers markets, or they'd be around the town, and sort of striking up conversations. Some of the advice we've given people, and this is, it's probably more of a rural thing than an urban thing, is you don't have to go to your shed. You can go to the shed a town over, because sometimes there's relationships there going back to primary school that you can't solve. So you actually suggest to someone, well, just go a couple of towns over, and some people have quite happily done that. And I know a couple of stories in urban settings too, where I don't want to, so-and-so doesn't, I don't want to, that sort of Irish objection that, don't fully understand it, but I'm not getting over it. So you're going to go, well, why don't you go to the one a few towns over, and because they're more into woodwork, or you could offer them more. Oh yeah, I might try that, and that's all great while somebody's still mobile. but I think it builds confidence, and then sometimes it's easier that way as well. So,
okay, great. And on the funding side, are you finding it an easier conversation now with HSE, whoever you're seeking funding from, Department of Education, wherever, around now with the COVID pandemic situation and the benefits of organizations and social supports like Men's Sheds and others, that they're seeing an increased value, and it's maybe, with the whole focus on shifting to health promotion as getting much more attention now directly related to COVID, that it's an easier conversation, or you're finding it maybe more possible to sell, let's say, the Men's Shed service as something that could be integrated, I guess, into the health services strategy?
Yes and no. Yes, as I say, the case is there, the case is stronger. That the organisation in question hasn't moved to that bit yet, and I think it's coming, but they're not there yet. And I think that we're all waiting to see what Pascal wants to do about the debts they've run up to. But I think we would be making the case prior to this around the sort of the Sheds for Life and the benefits, and these very difficult to reach men. I mean, we haven't got there yet, but we need an economic metric model to say, if you can keep a man out of a hospital on average of 3 months at a cost to the society of X amount per bed, per night, per day, instead of just giving less than 20% of that money to an organisation that can put the healthcare in sheds and preempt anything that's going to happen. So we're at that level, and the case is strong. It's just what you're dealing with is the challenge, as always.
That's very consistent with, Frank, that's very consistent with the Sláinte Care strategy.
Yes, and we very much we're seeing it as part of that, but we're waiting to see where Sláinte Care is going to land.
Well, they're a bit preoccupied at the moment, I think.
Absolutely, and I think that everybody, it's all making sense, but they just, the decision making isn't there yet. But that's understandable, given that there's a lot of work to be done yet. So,
absolutely.
But just overall on funding, so we'd be less than, I suppose, 50% funded by the HSE, and then we have received funding from the Department of Community and Rural Affairs, which kind of broke up a bit, but it seems to be it's now there's a charities minister, so that's a good thing. And then we've private funding, philanthropy, foundations, and corporate partners.
And is your funding, Frank, is that for Men's Sheds Ireland, or does it also go to individual sheds?
Yeah, well, I'm with the organisation since May 19, and prior to that, it was very much about funding the association. And then this time last year, as the sheds were shutting down, and it was peak fundraising season for them, March, April, May, they'd be selling firewood, they'd be selling, they'd be out at markets, they'd be doing all sorts of local raffles. So previous to that, the association hadn't fundraised for sheds. But we set up a public campaign last year, public facing campaign last year, and we raised money, sort of SOS money, for the sheds themselves that we distributed widely to the sheds. And then and that was matched by Pobble with the stability fund. There was a great stability fund put in place, about 35 million to support charities. So again, we applied for that money, but that went straight to the sheds. So it's kind of, we've crossed the Rubicon in a sense, and there's a mechanic designed, and we've applied for a license. It's in the Circuit Court last July. So we'll have an annual draw that will work. If anyone's familiar with the GAA club draw, or the Cub Scouts have a similar type, where the mothership, if you like, underwrites the prizes, but the money gets raised locally. The tickets that are sold locally, the money stays locally. It's that type of mechanic. So, but we're just waiting to get out of lockdown to see if we can you know, execute that piece. So I think that the Rubicon has been crossed. We do fund for sheds, but we realise we can't fund for 457 sheds, given the different rent structures, the different build structures. We put things in place to reduce their costs. We have a partnership with FPD. We have a partnership with Flow Gas for mains electricity, mains gas. And we have partnerships with Free Ireland around broadband, Wi-Fi connectivity that way. And so that's kind of, it's fundraising by reducing costs as much as it's fundraising by putting money into their bank accounts.
Just another question, just for me as well, Frank, a comment more than anything else. I just love the idea of malehealth.ie as well, and the facility to do an NCT check on yourself. I mean, say that, I think that really appeals to me, at least, and I think to most men, that if they can go in there and maybe help themselves for information, rather than maybe, you know, the stereotypical male issue of going out and speaking about a problem they may be having. But if there's a resource there, they can actually go and maybe plug in and find some more reliable information themselves on a resource like that. I think that's fantastic as well. What's our response or hits are you getting on that website, or do you get any feedback from men who go there to use that service and to continue to tweak and improve the service?
Yeah, the web traffic is low enough. We've worked with Google to sort of improve the search and the searchability of it. And it comes up it ranks fairly highly in SEO. I think it's kind of, I'd like to think that my background is sort of, you know, fundraising and sponsorships and partnerships. I think it's crying out for a partner. I'm always trying to pitch it as somebody, a brand that wants to show that, you know, they're into that male health space and promoting it. But it ticks over is probably the best expression for it. When we go out and we present it and it spikes, and you can almost see the activity spiking, but it deserves a bit more of an oomph, but we need to find the right way of doing that, or the right partner to do that. But it's good. It's a very simple to use, and I think what's great is if it says heart and possible blood pressure, you can then go to the Heart Foundation and get their material, which is an excellent material, and then you can go to the doctor, or you can just, you know, at least when you walk into the doc, you can say, I think it's this, and I think it's that, with some authority.
Yeah, it's just a trigger. I mean, so that for me means it's part of what I'm doing myself. It's just a trigger and getting people to kind of heed their warning signs, maybe. And I think it's a great resource just to kind of provide an early warning indicator, I guess, like your motor engine warning light, I guess. You know what I mean? So it'd be great. I guess that's the intention, right? Is to give that trigger to people to go and get something done before something happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So Frank, from a standing start, how difficult is it to set up a men's shed?
It's, I suppose the most important thing and the hardest thing is the men. So you need sort of 6 to 8 men who meet regularly, whether it's for a coffee, a chat once a week or whatever. And then it's property. So a lot of sheds thrive and survive at the behest of local philanthropy, where it's a developer might have a house at the end of a development, or there might be somebody whose the house it passed to a family, but they're not ready to what they want to do with it yet, so they might give it over as a shed, or there's the community centre. So it really depends on the community in which you're trying to set it up with regards to what's available. There's sheds that are thriving as porta cabins outside community centres, at the back of community centres as well. And we've worked with some companies to source those porta cabins. So the hardest piece is getting the men to stick to it and commit to it, and committing to the journey. But it's not meant to be that difficult, and we provide ready to go constitutions and articles of association. We have a charity number that any shed locally can use by agreement with revenue. We've applied for the charity number, but the local sheds can use it for applications, for grant applications. And it's funny, you're seeing, and there is a lot more, grants available on the local level. When you reach a certain tipping point, you start to see, and you engage with your local partnership, your local LTC or your local partnership, you're starting to see funds for a lot for capital. Current costs are always the challenge. I think anyone will relate to that. And having something ticking over just to keep the bills at bay, but certainly structurally we're becoming an awful lot better in society, in our communities.
And if you walk in, Frank, do you find now that without exception, so county councils, for instance, local authorities, they immediately recognise what a men's shed is, they respond to it?
Yeah.
And I suppose another simple question is that, I mean, let's say there was a men's shed looking to get going. I mean, is there any element of, everyone sticks a $5 in the jar to buy the tea bags type thing, or is that kind of forbidden? Everything has to be kind of done centrally and funded? And
no, it's the opposite. It's some sheds, you go to East Wall, it's €2 for every, in the jar. We go down to Adair, in Limerick, and they have set up direct debits. But again, they don't chase them. There's not a roll call at the start of the meeting saying so-and-so hasn't paid. There's a direct debit there to make it easy, because the fellas are coming down and they weren't always having the money for the jars. So they just said, can I just send it to you? So there's a combination of things, but no, it does thrive at that level where some sheds are experts in taking pallets, breaking them up and selling kindling, and they'll fundraise that way. Some sheds make honey. There's some great bee stories coming out of sheds. I suppose that's one thing I didn't say, is that we got, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, but the Men's Sheds Association is a champion of the Sustainable Development Goals. We're a champion of 4 goals, and around recycling and reusing. And I think that's where we're starting to see some commercial traction for if commercial is the right word, but certainly some engaging. So they fundraise at all levels, to answer your question quickly, Richie, sorry. Yeah. And I might say that there's also the embryonic start of women's sheds, and some call themselves hen sheds and some call themselves women's sheds. And there's also some more progressive sheds where there's men and women in the sheds. But I suppose at the moment, they're just dealt with those men's sheds.
Have you come across a situation, Frank, where you've got wealthy sheds, if you know what I mean, and then other sheds who literally can't afford the tea bags?
Yeah. I always tell by the jumpers. You can always tell by the jumpers. There's fellas who wear Gant jumpers, and then there's fellas who wear jumpers, the same jumpers, for about 10 years. And you can always tell when you go into a shed, that's my tell anyway. But no, like, they reflect society. So there are sheds that, I suppose, one other way of saying it is, we had a competition we did with Top Line Hardware. It was called the Shed Series. Each shed had to design or produce something to promote their local area. So some sheds, the shed with the vocational school and the woodwork equipment and all the stuff, they showed up with this magnificent piece of woodwork designed around their local, they had the names carved of all the local townships in their county. Fantastic piece of work. Another shed showed up with duck huts, which are something I never even knew existed, but they're huts where ducks, they're basically kennels for ducks that you put beside ponds, so ducks can lay eggs. In areas, it helps the biodiversity and things like that. And then another shed in a Dublin suburb showed up with an oil painting of their local area. So you do get, if that reflects the sort of the wealth or the background, I think it's probably, it reflects the different backgrounds. And I think that's the tapestry of Ireland, which is fantastic to see in one place, because it's rare that you get to see it. We have a video of it. But so yeah, you do get sheds who are more, like Slane, for example, is the Premier League of sheds. They fundraised, individual members were able to put in a certain amount of money to get get, and now they have their own building just off the main street in Slane, fantastically bespoke 2-story building where the shed is there, and Carrigaline are just finishing off theirs, and Middleton, and so yeah, there is a socio-economic tapestry to them as well.
Frank, it's Jennifer here. Just one question on, you touched on it earlier in regards to family can maybe be concerned about someone, but you can't really get them to join. So I suppose from a promotion standpoint, if you see someone that is really struggling, what would be tips or recommendations that you could give on how to promote it to the partner? You know, without it being something that you feel like they have to do, or, you know, like you're not really saying you need to get counseling, or, you know, it's a very open topic for someone to join in. But I can see that there's a huge barrier there sometimes with having someone actually being open to step into a shed. So what would be the tips there on highlighting that to someone that is maybe quite isolated and that would really benefit from being in a group?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Thanks, Jennifer. I think it's pointing out to somebody that they've an awful lot to offer a shed. I think that's the important thing. It's like, and I suppose that's the way sheds work. You don't go to a shed to get help. You go to a shed to be involved in a shed, and so it's a two-way street. So if you're talking about somebody, you can say, well, did you ever think of going down and giving the lads a hand, because I saw that they're cleaning out the river, at the end of the week. Or someone told me that they don't have any IT skills, where you have them in abundance. Would you think of setting up the way it begins? If that's one way of beginning a journey, that's a great way. The other one is sometimes they don't want to go to the local shed, as I said. They might want to go to one a couple of towns over. The other way is if you talk to, and again, the primary contacts as listed on the website, they're listed there for a reason, and to have a conversation outside the shed. So somebody, it can be quite intimidating, to walk into a shed with, that you walk in and there's a room full of strangers. Like, that's intimidating for anyone, no matter how you're feeling in yourself or of yourself. So I think I think there are many ways, and again, if it is call the association and advise, because we're there as well to sort of see what approach would work. I mean, but there are different ways. But I think also, as we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, is doctors are now recommending them, and that's something. If they can't get to a shed, they can get to a doctor. I think some doctors are becoming aware of the existence of them and the benefits. So.
Hi Frank, Mark here from iDyslexic. I see a great kind of an alignment. You spoke there about bringing back the high street, but like for younger men to get involved, could you see the older guys kind of mentoring, sponsoring, even creating a kind of an apprenticeship for kids who have dyslexia, ADHD and stuff like that, where you could actually guide them through into the men's shed, so it's always going to be there for them, and not just in, we'd say, the big urban spaces, but in the rural spaces as well. As the towns get decimated, it would be fantastic to see the likes of yourselves to roll into the post offices, to the town centres, just to support the younger kids and younger men who need that support, where they're more isolated in the remote working space.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mark. And what we've seen it happen on very much in pockets. Obviously, the over 18 thing is just, that has to be there, because you're into Garda bedding and it's hard enough to get the men into the shed without that. But we have seen programs where sheds have reached out to schools. There's a shed I'm thinking of in Dunleary, and they take every week they sort of, and again, it comes into this model of who's helping who, and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because the sheds feel that they're helping these two they're acquired brain injury patients from up the road, and they come in every couple of weeks. But I've been there when everyone's helping everyone. Like it works, you know what I mean? So I think it has to be done at a local level to a certain extent. We've looked at, you know, training certificates and all that sort of thing, and we as associations, we can't get into that. There are people there to do that. We can facilitate it and we can set it up, absolutely. And I think, to answer your question, yes, there is a conversation to be had at that level, and then the solutions, though, they have to be stitched individually at local community level. But I don't think...
I suppose one of the things that we're doing as well, I'm also involved with iHelp and iLaugh. So what we do is we build the back end for charities as well. So we allow them to deal with their own people and their own sheds. So it's maybe a conversation we might have down the line, Frank. So we may be able to assist you going forward with it. It's Brendan Morrissey.
That's Brendan Morrissey, yeah.
Yeah, so I work with Brendan across various organisations that he's involved with. So look, if we can help you in any way, just get back in contact with me and we'll see what we can do. Because we can do it for each individual shed.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I think that it's working out. That model is exactly what we need to do.
Yeah.
But it's possible. There's a great story of an elderly man that it was told to me, but it was an elderly man who was a welder all his life, and a young guy came in, and a young man came into the shed around the time they started the sheds, and in the course of the year, the older guy had given the younger guy a foundation in welding, and the younger guy had taught the older guy how to talk to his cousins on his iPhone or a smartphone, and so there was a mutually beneficial exchange of skills. And if you could just, it's happening. It's just it's not formalized. It just needs to be, I suppose, encouraged and maybe pushed in a little direction. But yeah.
I see a great opportunity though for everyone to kind of come together and support it, you know. So it's just something that we can talk about.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Mark. That's great. I'll definitely give you a shout afterwards.
Yes.
Okay, I guess we're running out of time. We're over time at this stage, but really fantastic discussion. I know several people have had to drop off other commitments and so on, Frank, but just really wanted to just say thank you so much. That was really, really brilliant and an eye-opener, I think, for everyone who was on the call today. So just wanted to say continue the great work, and thanks for coming in today to share the story. And it's a great way of making us aware, and maybe through Ireland Together as well, we can use that as an awareness channel as well for all the good work you're doing.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks a million for the opportunity, and continue supporting each other as much as, and we'll be here, and we'll hopefully, once we get out from underneath this pandemic, we'll be part of a new Ireland, thriving together. Thanks very much, guys. All the best.
Thanks so
Take
much.
care.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.